Koichi went from being a total loser with a lame quirk to a pro hero with one of the strongest quirks in the world. For most of his life, Koichi misunderstood his quirk Slide and Glide. His mother's quirk, Fly Swatter, lets her slap things from a distance. So Koichi ended up with a more complicated version of her simple gravity repulsion. Since his mom was really strict, Koichi was on the receiving end of many slaps and scoldings. And this started early because unlike most people, Koichi was actually born with his quirk. As a baby, he was already floating before he could even stand upright. Doing so was totally natural to him, but his mom was worried about his safety. So whenever he used his quirk to float, she'd smack him. That ended up stunting his quirk development and subconsciously kept him on the ground. When he was a bit older, he tried to glide while standing, but ended up falling over every time. So going for more stable positions became a habit, and he mostly activated his quirk while using all 4 of his limbs. Still, Koichi was always drawn to heroics. Like most kids, he spent a lot of time pretending to be a hero. But he was also more into it than others, and never wanted to stop. Like Deku, All Might was his favorite hero, so he mostly imitated him. And even as a regular kid, Koichi would throw himself into the middle of random fights and totally ignore the danger if it meant helping someone. But his mom's stance on heroes was like a tamer version of how Shigaraki's dad felt about them, that they let themselves be used by the public while their personal lives fall apart. Even so, Koichi insisted on becoming a hero. So in middle school, he applied for the hero course of a high school in Tokyo. But he ended up running late for his entrance exam. Since he was new to the area, Koichi wound up getting lost. To make matters worse, a kid was drowning in the river nearby. Although he didn't have any time to spare, Koichi leapt in to save the day. After saving the kid, he gave them his hoodie, and immediately rushed off to take his exam. The kid, who Koichi assumed was a little boy, was actually Popstep. But while he became Popstep's hero from then on, he still missed the entrance exam. So his hopes of becoming a pro hero began to fade away. In their society, you can't become a hero without going to a special school. So from then on, everyone his age seemed to accept the reality and totally gave up on trying to become heroes. To fit in, Koichi stopped wearing his All Might hoodies in public. He did his best to prepare a stable life for himself and put his childish delusions behind him. He hit the books and decided to study something that would make better use of his passion, which is why he went to college for a degree in hero sociology. But old habits die hard. So when he moved to Naruhata, Koichi still roamed the streets as nice guy, and did his best to help people in his neighborhood. Thanks to that, even before they were properly acquainted, Knuckle Duster was someone that Koichi saved. After losing his quirk to All for One, Knuckle Duster's life was a wreck. He had a drinking problem, lost faith in the system, and pushed away his old friends. Before becoming the vigilante Koichi knew him to be, Knuckle Duster was a drunk thug who beat people up and checked their tongues for signs of trigger use. Koichi got in the middle of one of those situations and ended up taking a beating. But even while his own nose was bleeding, he offered the former hero a tissue to take care of his. That simple moment turned Koichi into Knuckle Duster's hero, which is why the old man was so insistent on working with him. Aside from hitting the streets together, Koichi and Knuckle Duster also did some boxing training. But since Koichi didn't believe he was well suited for hand-to-hand combat, it felt a bit pointless to him. However, this ended up being major for him in the late game of the story. In the world of My Hero, knowing even the smallest bit of martial arts is insanely beneficial. Ojiro's quirk just gave him a strong tail, but thanks to martial arts, he was able to keep up with the exceptional abilities of his UA classmates. Uraraka used gunhead martial arts to counter and subdue some of the toughest characters around, yet her internship at Gunhead's agency only lasted for a week. Miruko is undoubtedly one of the greatest fighters in the series, and in high school, she was a cage match luchadora. Stain's quirk had nothing to do with how insanely capable he was as a fighter. That was all thanks to the fact that he was a trained swordsman. But besides teaching Koichi how to hit, Knuckle Duster also taught him how to defend and take a hit. Now, thanks to his work as nice guy, Koichi became very familiar with his territory. So in the mornings, he used its blind spots to train his quirk since no one would see him. which is usually a rare opportunity for movement types. Although Slide and Glide left a lot to be desired in the speed department, it was impressively capable of precise movements. Moving backwards, sideways, and even spinning in place were as simple as going forward. And that was rare, even for highly trained movement quirks. But Koichi still had trouble controlling himself at higher speeds. Ida's older brother Tensei told Koichi to try accelerating in the opposite direction when he wants to hit the brakes. That one suggestion changed everything immediately. Now that it was an option for him, Tensei also told Koichi how important high speed can be for hero work. The hero even wanted to recruit Koichi as a member of his team. But although it was a great honor, Tensei eventually took the offer back. Koichi was already playing an important role as a vigilante after all. But even so, the crawler gained a pro-hero running partner to race against. From there, Koichi's speed really picked up, which allowed him to pick up more trash and help more people. And since he could now stop on a dime, he even incorporated zigzags into his movements. Koichi could also give people rides on his back and still maintain speed. But even with his newfound capabilities, Koichi refused to stop collecting trash. That's just the kind of hero he is. Koichi showed off his new moves while training with Knuckle Duster. His master was impressed by how well thought out they were. From here on out, Koichi would be very annoying to fight. But while Koichi was getting stronger, his reputation as a vigilante was still in rough shape. According to a survey, most people found him creepy. In the field, Koichi managed to keep up with Tensei and provide backup. The hero's own team admitted that Koichi is faster than their sidekicks. And while Tensei needed juice to refuel his engines, all the crawler needed was a good hoodie. Yeah, Koichi took his All Might hoodies very seriously. Although he could wear something more durable, just wearing them was enough to fill him with courage. As an ultimate fanboy, he had a special one for every year, along with a bunch of location-specific versions. Koichi regained his ability to fly through sheer force of will and the desire to save someone. But when he managed to save her, he didn't exactly stick the landing himself. Afterwards, Koichi could only manage to lift himself 30 centimeters off the ground, which isn't much at all. Believing his double jump to be a fluke, he assumed it was a one-time miracle that came at the cost of his Asakusa All Might hoodie. Now, Koichi's development took a major turn when Knuckle Duster left. From then on, there was no one to explain things or guaranteed to land the last hit on their opponents. Although he still had Pop Step, Koichi had to figure out a lot more than he did before. Ultimately, Knuckle Duster was only around for a few months of Koichi's first year. In the early days of his master's absence, the villain seemed to be getting stronger. Since Knuckle Duster left behind his brass knuckles, Koichi wondered if he should start carrying a weapon to defend himself with. He even took care of the so-called punching accessory and treated it like a treasure. But Pop Step was against it, since it wasn't their place to fight villains. At that point, they were technically freelance sidekicks for the American hero, Captain Celebrity. So their main function was calling in real heroes for help. So Koichi decided to listen to his teammate and stay inside the lines. Later, Koichi discovered a whole new function of his quirk while chasing a bullet train. He stuck to the side of it as if magnetized. His gravity repulsion actually doubles as a form of suction. It was something that he had always done without thinking, aka his habit of sticking to the ground instead of floating. Whenever his body began lifting off, Koichi subconsciously clamped down on the ground. Now, he could literally take his name, the Crawler, to new heights. Koichi was so fast by now that Fat Gum assumed he must be a speedy pro hero. By incorporating speed with his suction and repulsion, Koichi could launch himself across great distances. It was like having Pop Step's leap quirk, and he could even latch onto enemies if they were big enough. Unfortunately, Koichi's new wall cling move only made him look creepier to the people in his neighborhood. While clinging to a wall, Koichi simultaneously shielded himself from incoming projectiles, and that presented a whole new aspect of his power. He began focusing his gravity repulsion into one hand, sort of like his mom's quirk. With a more stable position, he could add far more weight and power to each release. And just like that, the scrappy thrust style was born. The Crawler finally had some offensive potential. But looking back on how Knuckle Duster was, Pop Step convinced Koichi not to go down that path. Still, Koichi kept practicing. By locking his feet in place, he could better handle the recoil and avoid falling over. He actually started working on an ultimate move early on, but was interrupted by Pop Step. She didn't want him to use his projectiles without a hero license. To her, it was like throwing rocks at people. And again, Koichi listened to her advice. Mostly. He used it if the situation really called for it. And even against villains who were tough for pro heroes to beat, Koichi was able to keep a cool head and come up with suitable strategies. He ended up saving Eraserhead's life by jumping into one of his fights. This was the first time Koichi used his blast on a person, and while it didn't knock the bulky villain out, it did draw blood. Even so, he couldn't afford to stand still in the fight, so instead, he kept a distance and fired a bunch of weaker shots. In fact, shooting while moving backwards was surprisingly easy for him. He winded the big guy with a point-blank shooty-go blam, but it still wasn't strong enough to finish things on its own. Sometime later, Koichi's neighborhood gained a speedy train-faced villain. But even while being chased and moving quickly, Koichi was still keen enough to notice a bearded knuckle duster watching him from a rooftop with binoculars. It seems like always being on the lookout for trash trained Koichi to be extremely perceptive. Now, next level villains were pretty much prototype Nomu. Fun fact, the name Nomu comes from the Onomura Pharma Corporation, the pharmaceutical company that secretly produced these guys. When one of them threatened to kill Captain Celebrity along with 50,000 people inside the Tokyo Sky Egg, Koichi showed up to help. While hanging upside down at a height of almost 500 meters, Koichi blocked the villain's attacks and shot back. Although they weren't strong enough to deal meaningful damage, his pot shots were able to keep their enemy busy. But the suction effect of his powers still wasn't totally reliable, so he almost fell to his doom. In the end, All Might managed to save the day. Finally, Koichi met his favorite hero. He even managed to get his hoodie signed by the legend himself. This is also the event that made Horikoshi call him the coolest dude in history. As such, this marked a major turning point for the Crawler's career. Captain Celebrity's wife thanked Koichi for saving her husband's life. With that, Koichi was actually receiving praise for a change. In fact, his reputation changed too. The Crawler became Naruhata's legendary savior. People actually said his name correctly, and if he said it out loud near the train station, he'd show up in a flash. Koichi was so skilled by now that he could dodge two huge attackers at once without even paying attention. He even had fans who wanted to take pictures with him. Koichi had officially been a vigilante for more than 3 years. He was living his dream. By then, he'd run through his entire collection of hoodies. But even though they were all pretty beat up, he still treasured them and refused to throw them away. With that, it was time to break out his final hoodie, the Dark Color Special, which seems to be based on All Might's Bronze Age costume. Koichi decided that once his hoodie ran its course, it would be time for the Crawler to retire. And like he imagined, the summer of his senior year would be the Crawler's final season. From here on out, the tone of the story would be way more serious, and Koichi goes solo. Now, he was fast enough to save a girl from a falling building, and right after that, he quickly leapt across the city. The sky itself became a launch pad for him, and the distance he could fling himself was surreal, although his landings were still a bit rough at times. To save Pop Step, Koichi needed to arrive on the scene even faster than the police and pro heroes. So he started training with the help of 3 repentant thugs. His acceleration was unreal. His ability to turn and adjust was absurd, and he could stop on a dime. And he could go even faster on long roads. Still, Koichi could only handle 2 mid-air jumps in a row, and even that was pushing it. If he went for 3, he wouldn't have enough power for his wall cling. If he built up enough momentum, wall climb could take him to the top of a skyscraper before he ran out of breath. But if he pushed it too far, he'd lose suction power and fall. Taking a break midway through would leave him stranded since he wouldn't have enough momentum. Since running out of breath made him fall, Koichi needed to master the timing of his breathing. When it came to shooty go blam, Koichi's accuracy was perfect. It was pretty much automatic by then, but it still wasn't very strong. Before, that was on purpose. He'd use it as a simple distraction or to slow down a rushing villain. He ended up letting Popstep decide how much power was too far, and it seems like she wanted it to be as strong as a Nerf gun. Anything more than that was too far. But now that he was solo, Koichi tested what it would be like if he stopped holding back. Now, it was as strong as a rifle. His hands were lethal weapons. By focusing on the core of its power, Koichi could form a halo that made all of his shots faster and stronger. Using his quirk like this was very illegal, but by then, he had no other choice. Koichi moved on to shooting from a long range, although subconsciously, he couldn't bring himself to use his full power shots on people. Even so, he was super accurate with anything else. They didn't have time to change his habits that deeply, so mobility became the main focus of his training. Evasion, climbing while weighed down, a quirk-supported exercise routine. They did everything they could to prepare him, and it worked. The notorious Naruhata Vigilante speed was officially top tier. He was so fast that several heroes couldn't even get a good look at him. His shooty go blam was accurate enough to shoot individual bees while they swarmed. Honestly, at this point, I'd say Koichi was almost Hawks level. If nothing else, he was definitely on par with the top 10 pro heroes at the time. But more on that soon. Some pro heroes tried to chase him. Instead of fighting them, Koichi used them to his advantage. He routed them like pieces on a board for the sake of his ultimate goal. And although he didn't come up with this plan by himself, only he could execute this complicated maneuver on trained professionals. Koichi also added a few gadgets to his toolkit. He used a homemade smoke bomb that was loaded with pheromones to deal with the pesky bees. And like Knuckle Duster, Koichi started using a grappling hook. That way, his quirk giving out on him wouldn't be so bad. He certainly wasn't as skilled as Knuckle Duster was at using it, but he didn't need to be. As long as he could catch his breath and gain momentum, it would be a success. After someone sniped Popstep out of the sky, Koichi used mid-air acceleration to drop faster than her. Then, he caught Popstep, did a 360 spin just a few feet off the ground, and finally stuck the landing by shattering the ground beneath him. Yeah, he's just nice like that now. Koichi immediately raced away from the pursuer while holding Popstep's body. Mind you, he was not crawling anymore. Koichi was 10 toes down and standing upright. Even when the villain, whose quirk pretty much let him be the Flash, pulled up on him in a split second, Koichi noticed immediately. And miraculously, he made it out of striking range just as quickly. The force fields created by Slide and Glide sprouted brand new orbiting ones. This was extra oomph, a sudden rush of incredible speed. But while the villain was now behind him, Endeavor himself became Koichi's next obstacle. Even so, the Vigilante did not slow down. He rushed directly towards the number 2 hero. Koichi was confident that he could dodge all of the attacks. And when he did, Endeavor was pissed. He kicked things up a notch with his raging assault, Hell Minefield. The whole road became an inferno. Koichi leapt up. Endeavor made the fire move upwards, and Koichi used extra oomph in mid-air. This time, he was like a missile. Everyone was stunned. The crawler was flying. Meanwhile, the speedster villain wasn't nearly fast enough and was incinerated. Afterwards, he looked like a crumb at the bottom of an air fryer. From there, Koichi didn't have much power left for their landing. So ingeniously, he zigzagged his way down to make their momentum survivable. Later, even while being on the rooftop of a city building, Koichi was accurate enough to snipe a man's toolbox. But for as crazy as Koichi's skills were, he was still nowhere near the peak of his power. Because after the villain swore to kill him and Popstep, Koichi decided to get serious about stopping him. Which brings us to Koichi's villain arc. The Crawler was officially a wanted man with a warrant for his arrest. But Koichi was so fast that people didn't even know what he was when he passed them. He was actively throwing off the police and outspeeding cars. Ida's brother was one of the few people who could catch up to him. But even then, Koichi was clearly faster. When Tensei wanted him to pull over and talk, Koichi compromised by latching onto the side of a moving truck while the hero spoke. Koichi already planned on turning himself in. but not before handling what needed to be done. And the only way to do that was to work outside of the system. And while Popstep was vulnerable and recovering, Koichi needed to be ready to protect her at a moment's notice. But although Koichi put some distance between himself and Ingenium, the hero had his sidekicks ready to intercept. Koichi quickly escaped the hero agency's ambush, and after seeing his insane verticality and years worth of growth, Tensei had to admit that the crawler was just too much for them to handle. This was a job for the big names. And so, Koichi was intercepted by Edgeshot and Best Jeanist. Jeanist turned Koichi's clothes into a straitjacket, but even like that, Koichi was still able to use his quirk to launch himself off the roof. The moment the fabric loosened while they tried to save him, Koichi launched himself away. They clearly underestimated his resolve. Capturing someone desperate enough to disregard their own well-being is very difficult. But according to them, as pro-heroes, that is not an excuse they can make. The next hero Koichi faced was Eraserhead. The two knew each other well by now. And unlike the other pros, Eraser could handle the streets of Naruhata just fine. Eraserhead made the first move, but Koichi was too fast. Koichi leapt back, but Aizawa shut down his quirk. The crawler didn't let that stop him. He made a run for it. People were confused when they saw Koichi running on foot like a normal person. They also hadn't seen Eraserhead in a while since he decided to become a teacher. Knowing how Eraserhead's quirk works, Koichi focused on escaping his line of sight. Once his powers returned, he went up a building to shake the hero off. But Eraserhead found him midway. Koichi's secret spots weren't so secret to the hero who used to work in the area. To that, Koichi pulled up his grappling hook and made his escape. Eraserhead couldn't believe it. Twice in a row, the crawler was totally unfazed by the absence of his quirk. He switched to quirkless tactics without hesitation. Eraserhead had to admit that even without a quirk, the crawler was a tough opponent. They played tag like that for a while. But when Naruhata needed a hero, both of them rushed in to help. Once they were seen, the people of Naruhata crowded around the crawler and wanted him to explain the strange power outages. Eraserhead mostly got the sidekick treatment. And even when he explained that he's the only hero between them, it was clear to Koichi that Eraserhead wasn't built for customer service. In that time, the other heroes who were chasing after Koichi managed to catch up. But instead of apprehending him, they stepped in to help the town in its time of need. Koichi thanked them for helping, but also tried to slip out. He could have actually gotten away long ago, but was grateful for their hard work and decided to thank them properly. Eraserhead ended up taking responsibility for Koichi. When they got caught up in the villain's trap, Eraserhead let Koichi escape. After accepting that he was needed elsewhere, Koichi scaled a city building in a flash and popped up above it. Then, he rushed across the night sky. Koichi's quirk began to struggle after that. Even so, he managed to use the same move back to back. And like we said before, 2 mid-air jumps was his limit. But Koichi needed to get to Popstep. So he ignored his feet and focused on heading straight towards his goal. After that, he did more mid-air jumps than he could count. When Koichi made it to the hospital, the villain was in the middle of a police shootout. Even Soga was there with a Scar assault rifle set to fully automatic. The point wasn't to hit the speedster, but to force him into using his quirk for too long, which would deoxygenate his brain. But since a gun only has so many rounds, he'd eventually be able to catch his breath. However, Koichi Shurigo Blam was perfect for the job. He rushed in with police pistols at his back. The move was set to rapid fire, with each shot being as strong as a normal punch. Just a hit from one ran the risk of rattling the villain's brain. With how quickly and endlessly the crawler could shoot, the villain had no time to breathe. One of the shots even hit him in the face. Koichi could now shoot at someone without a shred of hesitation. Not to mention the fact that each projectile tracks its target even at such incredible speeds. So the villain was forced to retreat. But the police didn't arrest the crawler. Tsukauchi told him to go get All Might. With that, Koichi flew off into the sky. He accepted that he's only good for sneak attacks and diversions. Going head to head with such a dangerous villain wasn't his area of expertise. he knew that going to get All Might was the right choice to make. But he came back instead. He greeted the villain when he landed. Koichi actually begged him not to hurt anyone. He was even willing to disappear if it meant keeping Pop Step safe. But just like in the first chapter, when someone tried to step on Koichi in the kowtow position, he swerved away without looking. Since the villain likes to monologue, he expected this to happen. Koichi used this as an opening since his opponent wouldn't accelerate and speak at the same time. He just needed to land one mean shot to the face and knock the villain out. But when Koichi thought of Pop Step's disappointed face, he couldn't do it. In that moment of hesitation, the villain flashed behind him and delivered an explosive punch. The freak was ready to move on to more victims, but unbelievably, Koichi was still alive. The villain tried again, but decided to move faster so he could see exactly what was going on. This time, he saw Koichi defend himself, using his quirk to disperse the explosion. And by moving backwards at the moment of impact, he neutralized the damage entirely. Koichi didn't even know he could do that. And once he was on guard, things became a lot harder for his opponent. Their speed was close, but Koichi's maneuverability was better, and he could fly. Koichi realized that sometimes his body moves without him thinking. The same sort of heroic quality that All Might admired in Deku. Over the years, his ability to defend and evade was really frustrating for villains to deal with, which was perfect, because pissing this guy off was exactly what Koichi needed to buy everyone more time. Even if he wasn't the best in a fight, the Crawler was an expert at running away. Between them, it was a game of cat and mouse. The mayhem extended all throughout the neighborhood. Even without looking at him, Koichi was able to read the villain's attack patterns based on sound and dodge accordingly. The villain literally altered his own physiology to mimic Koichi's wind-resistant stance. After that, he finally managed to catch Koichi in midair. But incredibly, Koichi blocked it with his quirk. The villain used his other fist, but Koichi blocked it again. So now, Koichi could project his force fields anywhere on his body. But even then, how was he reacting to super speed attacks in the first place? And even a light version of the villain's Knuckle Bomb could destroy a car. So Koichi's survival was insane. As it turns out, he was defending himself subconsciously. Really, most of Koichi's actions are subconscious. Although the villain could increase the processing speed of his own brain, Koichi's instincts were even faster than that. At that point, even All For One considered Koichi's quirk to be objectively superior to Overclock. High-speed movement, ranged attacks, defensive force fields, and the superhuman reflexes to use each ability at the best time. For the time being, Koichi's strong suit was running away. But as they say, ain't no fun when the rabbit got the gun. Like All Might, the Crawler was an opponent to be avoided. But number 6 refused to back down. He transformed yet again, becoming anatomically built for speed. Koichi could just barely dodge. And here comes that insane perception again because he noticed the villain slowing down to attack, so he focused on keeping his distance. But the attack patterns were way too random and way too fast. Each attack was like a spear thrust. It took everything Koichi had to defend. That said, accelerating with Overclock was like deep sea diving. The longer it's in use, the deeper the user sinks, and the harder it becomes for their body to function. But thanks to this transformation, the villain could handle the incredible speed at all times. It made him a supreme predator. However, the Crawler has always braved those same depths. The slightest threat instantly triggers his quirk. His reflexes were conditioned by his unique form of combat experience. Pro heroes tend to be preventative and stop villains before they can make the first move. But as a vigilante, Koichi was always on the defensive. He was very used to taking the first hit, and that created a different breed of fighter. Koichi unlocked Ultra Instinct in the middle of their fight. His reflexes were thoroughly trained to counterattack. Fighting Koichi directly was a losing game. So the villain changed his tactics. First, he tried throwing a bunch of bombs. And once Koichi dodged, there were even more bombs waiting for him in the air above. Even if he could avoid the minefield, The force of the blast should have been too much for him to handle, but Koichi's projectiles turned out to be just as instinctual. He returned the favor and shot all the bombs before they could become a real problem. Next, the villain used a bunch of human-shaped bombs who shared a hive mind connected to his bloodlust. This forced Koichi to avoid major streets since innocent people would be caught up in the battle. While he raced away, the villain planned on going full Lady Nagan by sniping Koichi from a distance. But that just earned him a beating from Knuckle Duster, followed by a surprise attack from Koichi. He grabbed the villain and launched him into the air. Since the villain couldn't fly, Koichi decided to drag him out of Naruhata himself. But in the midst of that, the madman blew himself up. Thanks to yet another transformation, he became living plasma. He gained the ability to fly and had high-speed missiles of his own. He could create enough tracking missiles to stop an army. With no other choice, the crawler locked in. He quickly boosted his speed to the max. With the added height and distance, he was able to catch his breath and shoot back. Their mid-air dogfight made its way to the news. The villain fired a barrage of missiles behind Koichi. With a wall of fire now behind him and an explosive fist ahead of him, Koichi was forced to defend. But it turned out to be a feint. The villain crashed into the dozens of bombers below and unleashed a combined detonation. The explosion was huge, but the villain's new form was even bigger. He punched through the building Koichi was clinging to. Koichi barely survived, but his leg was messed up. Then he was hit by a huge piece of rubble. That ruined one of his arms, a few ribs, and made it really hard to breathe. The best he could do was desperately slide away as the villain attacked. Koichi crawled his way into a parking garage. He was in the worst shape of his life. He could only hope that All Might would see the news and come save the day. But when the villain found his location, he gave into the flames of hatred and awakened his final form. Number 6. Destruction Style. Mimicking All Might, he crushed the entire building while the crawler was still inside. The vigilante blacked out. It was dark and he was bleeding out. It looked like the end of the road. But that's when Koichi saw Knuckle Duster. But really, Knuckle Duster was still with Soga, so this shouldn't have been possible. Koichi realized that his life was probably flashing before his eyes. He was going to die. But his imaginary master wasn't so sure about that. He checked to see for himself, and yeah, Koichi's body was definitely broken. But then he told Koichi to try wrapping up his injuries by using his quirk as a cast. Koichi figured that that sort of thing would take some crazy skills, which is funny because he got it to work immediately. Then he took it even further by coating his entire body like Captain Celebrity. Now he could basically float in midair. Truly, Koichi was every bit the hero his master expected him to be, and then some. Now, there was only one thing left for him to learn and embrace. How good it feels to beat the snot out of a villain. With a flashy crash, Koichi emerged as a new man. This was the crawler's knuckle style. Koichi was astonished by his own power. He knew for sure that it was way too strong, and despite everything, was worried about what Popstep would think. On top of that, his imaginary master was still with him. He helped identify the villain's vulnerabilities. There was even an imaginary Popstep with him. And at this point, Koichi might just sound very schizophrenic, but this was more of a metaphysical meeting. All three of them were on the verge of death. Knuckle Duster was injured while fighting the villain, and Popstep was having severe seizures. So like the more poetic elements of My Hero Academia's ending, their strong bond brought their spirits together. But while they both encouraged him, Koichi was afraid Popstep would be mad if he fought back. More than anything, he doesn't want her to hate him. She told him that there's a big difference between her getting mad and her hating him. Silently, she knew she could never hate Koichi, and that he knows she will always love him. The mega villain swung. Koichi skidded back. There were no heroes around. Koichi was the only one who could stand in the villain's way. So just this once, Popstep gave Koichi permission to go all out. Which finally brings us to full power Koichi. His fists blurred and symbolized the crawler's infinite heroic potential. The villain was turned into Swiss cheese. He couldn't believe it, but Koichi didn't let up. As the crawler tore through superheated plasma with a flurry of blows, even All For One had to admit that he was wrong for looking down on the boy's quirk. But since it was just plasma, the villain reformed soon after. Even so, Koichi didn't mind. If it's not his real body, he can go all out without killing and also buy enough time for pro heroes to arrive. The villain tried to strike back, but Koichi just went back to dodging. Despite his injuries, strangely, Koichi was feeling better than ever. When he punched holes through the Colossus again, All For One's fascination with Koichi's quirk only increased. The output levels were abnormally high. He was sure that Koichi was drawing on an unseen source of strength that continued to spur his evolution on. It was a solid back and forth between de facto hero and villain. Pop Step and Knuckle Duster were giving him ringside assistance. But although Koichi knew he should probably be more cautious, he was actually having a blast. Soon, his master and admirer both took a back seat, and Koichi accepted that this would be the day his dream came to an end. As with a titanic fist, the crawler's final hoodie was destroyed. All For One assumed the vigilante was dead with no traces left, but he was wrong. Slide and Glide doesn't give Koichi absolute defense. If he takes a wrong hit, he's done for. Koichi threw off the motorcycle gear his master gave him oh so long ago. He was already way beyond his limits. Running would be the reasonable thing to do, but for some reason, Koichi's spirit compelled him to stay. He realized that he's always been that way. The howls of villains as they endanger people with their quirks. While most people run away from those sounds, Koichi always felt compelled to run towards them. Saving innocent people was just the half of it. To him, it seemed like the people going berserk were in need of help too. So he gave his opponent a genuine smile. He had faith in the heroes and knew that they would make things right whenever they showed up. For now, he and number 6 would fight with all their hearts. To All For One, the two appeared to be dancing and even frolicking as they exchanged endless passionate blows. They were tapped into an energy source beyond the mastermind's comprehension. The final quirk frontier. The domain beyond the singularity. In the midst of this, the plasma villain learned how to reattach severed limbs. Thanks to that, he managed to clap Koichi between his hands. The moment Koichi lost focus, all the damage and pain he was suppressing hit him all at once. He was on the verge of passing out, but hearing his friends cheer him on brought him back right on time. Their fight was so intense that they unknowingly traveled into a populated area. It was almost too much for Koichi to handle. But thankfully, the heroes finally arrived. But even then, they didn't have anyone strong enough to put the villain down. Eraserhead wrapped up one of Koichi's arms and promised to back him up until more heroes show up. Unfortunately, he couldn't erase the villain's quirk because he was glowing too brightly. While Eraserhead helped him out, the people of Naruhata all cheered for the crawler. From civilians to friends, and even former troublemakers, they were all showing support for the hero of Naruhata. All the praise Koichi was receiving was everything the villain ever wanted in life. Seeing the crawler live his dream caused an even greater psychological breakdown. He split into a bunch of human-sized plasma bodies that exploded on contact. After only being on the scene for a little while, even a top hero like Best Jeanist was having a hard time. Watching it all unfold, Koichi could tell that the bombers were mindless, so he wondered where the real villain went. But since he wasn't around, Eraserhead went back to helping civilians. All Might arrived soon after. He caught up to each bomber in seconds and knocked them all sky high. Then Endeavor incinerated them all in one fell swoop. Even so, the villain managed to evade detection. He ditched the plasma and sped through the streets without anyone noticing. Finally, he found Koichi alone on a rooftop. A clean hit from behind would have done the job, and he'd be able to bring the crawler's body back to All For One for testing. Instead, he spoke, and Koichi smiled when he saw him. Koichi wanted them to go to the hospital together, but the villain explained that he didn't even have limbs or organs left, that his quirk was the only thing holding his body together. Really, he was already dead. But like a revenant, he was here to prove his existence and make his mark on the world. With a sudden rush of speed, he attacked and Koichi dodged. But that was all the villain wanted. He left a mark that's bound to become a cool scar. Now, every time Koichi looks himself in the mirror, he'll be reminded of the weight of responsibility and the meaning of existence, along with the guy he couldn't save no matter how hard he tried. The next moment, the villain blew himself up. Later, Eraserhead was the one to find Koichi's unconscious body. When Koichi woke up in the hospital, he expected to be thrown in jail. They were still waiting on the verdict. But then Captain Celebrity showed up, insisting that they release his sidekick or deal with an international incident. Popstep woke up from her coma and was still a bit weak, but she had a gift for Koichi. It was the one All Might hoodie he didn't have in his collection, the same one he gave her so many years ago. Koichi really appreciated it. He told her that even though he won't be wearing All Might hoodies anymore, he'll still treasure it. It was time for the Crawler to retire. They all left the room, but soon, Popstep was compelled to tell him how she really felt and rush back. When she did, Koichi was in the middle of trying the hoodie on. He was staring at it and just couldn't help himself. Popstep was overwhelmed by emotions. Then she ran into his arms. Koichi tried to tell Makoto that he learned his lesson and was done playing hero, but her lie-detecting quirk made his true feelings very clear. After that, they decided to go with Plan B. They pulled out a bunch of contracts and just told Koichi to sign them all. The former vigilante had no idea what he was signing, but he's always been one to go with the flow. Before long, renovations to Naruhata were being funded by Captain Celebrity's corporation. The old building where Koichi used to live was in the middle of being torn down. Besides that, Koichi's existence totally undermined All for One's direction. All Might was one thing, but having to account for any loser off the street turning into Superman through the right circumstances and sheer force of will was a bit too much. And exactly what Deku turned out to be. All for One's experience with the Crawler and Number 6 made him decide to go all in with his new path, the production of the Nomu. But that's something for the heroes of Japan to deal with in the future. Meanwhile, a new pro hero was preparing himself at Captain Celebrity's headquarters in New York. Koichi looked at his scarred face in the mirror and found his determination. The top of the skyscraper opened up, and the Crawler was on standby for launch. A plane lost power mid-flight and was on the verge of crashing into the city. Despite the situation, a little boy noticed someone outside. A hero was on the wing of the plane. He smiled at the kid, but was interrupted by a strong gust. Koichi actually slipped off. Thanks to a huge debt and plenty of lawsuits, he couldn't live in Japan. So he became a hero in the United States. The Skycrawler moved faster than the plane, and the people inside recognized him. But they weren't so sure he was up to the task. While some passengers gave up hope entirely, Koichi affixed his hands to the underside of the aircraft. Then he used his feet as propellants to soften the landing. Being a pro hero was definitely hard work. But thanks to the Skycrawler, all the passengers were safe. Unfortunately, Koichi needing to be saved from drowning himself wasn't the best look. And that was only half the battle. Apparently the States have quite the history with vigilantism. So it was important for Koichi to convince the public that he was truly a hero. Unfortunately, his English was really bad. To help him out, the team planted one of their people among the press and told him to respond to the question with the words, "Yes, I'll fight on with all my might." But during the interview, the Skycrawler missed the prompt and instead heard a homeless guy tell him to destroy a rich part of the city. Koichi didn't understand a word he said. He just gave a big smile and promised to do it with all his might. That really did not help his reputation. They even talked about him on the Japanese news too. The situation kept heating up while Koichi struggled with the language barrier and was freezing from the Hudson River water. That's when a street vendor tossed him something to warm up with. And like magic, that seemed to do wonders. The Skycrawler's codename is C-Cubed-02, because he's the second hero at Captain Celebrity's corporation. Design-wise, he was made to look like Captain Celebrity's sidekick, while also maintaining the All Might hoodie look and adding a slight Spider-Man vibe. And his main color is between sky blue like Captain Celebrity and royal blue like All Might. Also, his quirk Slide and Glide was reclassified as Flight, which makes his first big save being a plane a perfect fit. And there's also the fact that Popstep moved to the United States with him. 5 years later, in the aftermath of the final war, Koichi was able to return to Japan and help out with the relief efforts. This has been Koichi's evolution. Let us know your favorite moment down below. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love